Go straight back to the Greek story now. With us here on set, our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Stephen, we're going to start, aren't you, by look at the markets and how they're actually reacting to all this overnight news.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we've actually had a reaction on the value of the euro to the resignation of Yanis Varoufakis as well. We had the euro down about 0.75% against the dollar in early trading after the no vote in Athens overnight. But we saw those losses actually be reduced in the past few minutes as we've gotten the news that Yanis Varoufakis is to leave the finance ministry. The euro down, as you can see, just 0.4%, so pretty much halved the losses that we had against the dollar. €1 trading for just over $1.10. Now, that's interesting because obviously the markets do now expect that the negotiations will be that much easier because Yanis Varoufakis is no longer going to be leading those negotiations in Brussels. Over in the stock markets, though, we've still got pretty significant falls across the Asian indices. The Nikkei in Tokyo closing down by more than 2% in trading today. Pretty significant falls in Hong Kong on the Hang Seng Index as well. And even the Shanghai Composite, which had been dealing with some more issues closer to home earlier in the day, is down into negative territory now as well. We're expecting the European markets to open sharply down too, but we'll have to see now whether those losses will be mitigated by the resignation of Yanis Varoufakis.
And where does all this leave the Greek banks? They've been virtually closed now for a week, really, haven't they?
Yes, that's right. And there's really no sign of them reopening at this stage either. I mean, the government has been insisting the banks will reopen tomorrow. That looks unlikely at best. We know that they're very short of money. Natalie Savarakis in Athens was telling us earlier they have reserves of €500 million yesterday. That might not necessarily last them very long. Those controls, of course, were put in place to stop the flight of money out of the banks, that €60 limit. We're told that the Greek lenders have been called in by the central bank to look at the possibility of even reducing that limit further down to potentially €20 a day, which would be a huge increase, I suppose, in those capital controls. All eyes will be on the European Central Bank when its governing council speaks by phone later. They're key to this because the European Central Bank has been essentially propping up the Greek banks for many months now with this emergency liquidity assistance. It's called emergency loans to keep cash flowing into Greek banks. That's hit a ceiling of €89 billion. It can't go any higher without the governing council deciding so. It looks unlikely they'll raise that limit, but for the moment at least we don't expect them to cut the limit either. So we'll have to wait and see what their decision will be, but really the ECB's role to this is extremely central. That, of course, just one of the issues facing the Greek economy. To talk about this more, we can go to Athens and speak to Megan Greene. She's the chief economist at Manulife Asset Management and someone who's been watching the Eurozone crisis closely for many years. Megan, thanks for joining us on France 24. We're talking about the banks there. Are they really the biggest challenge that's facing Greece right now? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think that the banks are absolutely central to this. I think that it's quite likely that banks will run out of cash in the next week or so, even with tougher capital controls. But still, the real new deadline is July 20th, when Greece has to repay the ECB €3.5 billion. If Greece defaults on the ECB, I think that the ECB will essentially torpedo the banking system immediately by claiming that at least one Greek bank is insolvent and that the government needs to come up with either recapitalization or resolution plans for the bank. In the absence of a new deal, Greece will essentially have to print a new legal tender in order to resolve the bank. So I think it really will all come down to the banks.
Well, how much more dramatic is this situation now than it was on Friday? I mean, how does the no vote bring us that much closer to the Greek exit?
Well, I think it brings us closer in that I think it will be more difficult for this government to negotiate a deal that's acceptable to the Greek side in particular. If Greeks voted against the deal that was on the table previously, capital controls have been a total game changer for the Greek economy in a negative way, particularly at the height of the tourism season. So I think any deal that will be acceptable to Germany will require an even bigger fiscal adjustment now, not a smaller one, which is what the Greek government is hoping for.
And how do you think the resignation of Yanis Varoufakis is going to affect this? He was seen as a pretty unpopular figure in the negotiations. Is that political capital all important when it comes to those now inevitable negotiations on a third bailout?
Well, I think that it's a nice symbolic gesture, but ultimately I don't think that it's a game changer to have Varoufakis out of the picture. It will make the Eurogroup meetings slightly less toxic, I think, for Greece. But that being said, I think that Tsipras himself has burned a lot of bridges amongst European leaders. So I don't think it's enough to be a game changer in these negotiations and to convince the creditors to give Greece more concessions.
So we need to worry about July 20th. That's that payment to the ECB you were talking about. What are the chances, do you think, of there being a deal done before then?
Unfortunately, I think it's very unlikely. Like I said, Greece will need an even worse deal now than they had rejected yesterday, essentially. And, you know, the only way that we could see a deal is if the creditors were to put debt relief on the table. The IMF has come out formally now and said that they think debt relief is necessary. But of course, anybody watching Greece for any period of time will know that the IMF has thought that all along. So I'm not sure that that's really a game changer. And I think that Germany in particular will continue to demand that Greece actually show a record of implementation before debt relief is given. Of course, now the creditors are going to be more skeptical that this Greek government will be willing to implement any program than they were before.
Megan, the last time we spoke was the morning after Syriza had been elected to government. You know, you were in Athens then, you're back in Athens now. How have things changed there since then?
I think that capital controls have been a real game changer for the Greek people as well. I was in Syntagma Square last night, and the overwhelming vibe here was for Greeks who voted no, they just feel like they've been pushed so far that they sort of don't care anymore. If it's euros or drachma, life needs to go on here. And I think that the creditors are starting to feel the same way as well. So previously, Merkel in particular was really insistent on keeping Greece in the Eurozone. I think the creditors now feel more complacent about the prospect of a Greek exit from the Eurozone, and so they're less likely to do a deal than they were previously.
Megan, just finally, how worried do we need to be about the European Central Bank today? Are we likely to see any dramatic steps from them, do you think?
I don't think that the ECB will do anything today, but of course the ECB doing nothing will really hurt the banks. The Greeks are really hoping that the ECB will increase the ELA limit. They're not going to, well, it's very unclear what the negotiations are going to look like. They might go ahead and increase ELA tomorrow, or Tuesday rather, yeah, tomorrow, under the auspices that at least a bailout deal is under negotiation and leaders need some breathing room, but I think it's more likely that they'll just stay put until it seems like a deal might or might not emerge.
Okay, that's Megan Greene there from Manulife Asset Management. Megan, thank you for your analysis. It's yours.
Stephen, thank you very much. Stephen with the business news. And just to finish this section off, just been hearing, in fact, from the French finance minister, Michel Sapin. He's been saying that it's now up to everyone to respect the Greek vote, and it's up to the Greek government now to make its suggestions. The French finance minister just speaking while Megan was talking to Stephen there.